Military operations in the Red Sea have been heating up, leading the U.S. Navy to engage in the most intense battle since World War II, which is crazy to me because all my years on the Roosevelt aircraft carrier, including a deployment to the Middle East in 2008, the most action we ever saw was either from a rogue wave hitting the smoke pad or gunners getting cleared hot against the shiver of sharks during a swim call. But it appears the days of CIWS cannons and Sea Sparrow launchers just standing by and looking cool are over, because these recent engagements have led the Navy to deploy over $1 billion worth of munitions, firing more missiles in just 15 months than it did in the past 30 years. But are U.S. Navy ships in the Middle East and Indo-Pacific really in danger of losing their air defenses? Let's find out. The recent resumption of the hostilities in the Red Sea underscores a serious problem facing the U.S. Navy. It's burning through missiles faster than it can replace them. For the first time in decades, the Navy has had extended periods of combat at sea, encountering 21st century threats for the first time during Operation Prosperity Guardian in the Red Sea. Acting as shields for commercial shipping in the critical waterway, U.S. Navy ships have engaged anti-ship ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and swarms of various drone types launched by the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Aside from older missile types, there are threats the Navy hasn't faced outside of training exercises and war games. While the ships and sailors of U.S. task forces deployed to the Red Sea continue to perform admirably in the ongoing mission, the sheer volume of fire they've had to intercept revealed an uncomfortable truth. American ships and the Navy as a whole are more vulnerable to attrition than previously realized. But first, I have some info for anyone who's been seriously injured or involved in an accident. I've had my fair share of slips and falls and fender benders, but for millions every year, whether in a car, at work, or anywhere else, accidents can be a life-changing event, affecting ability to work, and sometimes causing even lasting or permanent harm. When these life-changing events occur, it's important to understand your options that may help you get you back on your feet. And Morgan & Morgan has the expertise and national network to get you the best results possible if you become a client. And their services are completely free unless you win your case. Since they're America's largest injury law firm, they have the resources to absorb all the upfront costs, with 100 offices nationwide and over 1,000 local high-powered attorneys. Just recently, they achieved some significant verdicts for their clients, like $12 million in Florida, 34 times the highest insurance offer, and $26 million in Philadelphia, which is 40 times the highest offer. If you've been in an accident or injured in any way, your case could be worth millions. So you can head over to the link in the description, forthepeople.com/taskandpurpose, and start a claim today that could change your life. Most recently, the Air Force shot down Houthi drones that were launched at the aircraft carrier USS Harry S. Truman, and U.S. Central Command recently released videos showing U.S. fighter aircraft using 70mm Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System 2, whoa, that's a mouthful, rockets to destroy Houthi one-way attack drones. The sophisticated and capable arsenal of air defense missiles the Navy currently relies on is fantastic, but also extremely expensive, especially against asymmetric threats like Shahad drones that cost under $200,000 to produce. The Secretary of the Navy revealed in April of 2024 that the service had fired off more than $1 billion worth of munitions during the first 6 months of operations in the Red Sea, and that's just against Iranian-backed proxy forces. By October of 2024, the total had risen up to $2 billion. This level of ammunition expenditure is simply unsustainable with America's current industrial capacity and procurement methods, and a stand-up fight against a near-peer competitor like China would deplete shipboard magazines even faster. Is missile capacity really the Achilles heel of the U.S. Navy? What can the Navy do about it? And will they have a solution in time to face growing maritime threats of the 2030s? Well, I don't know about y'all, but I want to be prepared when China christens its massive uncrewed combat vessel literally called the Killer Tiger, which looks like something Skynet would send back from the future to kill the entire human race. The fact that the Red Sea deployments of 2023 and 2024 were so intense could be a blessing in disguise for highlighting this issue. According to retired Navy Commander Brian Clark, the U.S. Navy saw the most combat at sea within 15 months in the Red Sea than any other time since World War II. That includes huge conflicts like the Korean and Vietnam Wars. It's kind of amazing how the Navy has held up with no losses, but the cost has been pretty enormous. During the 15-month period from October 2023 to January 2025, the Navy has fired almost 400 separate munitions against Houthi-launched weapons. The majority of those have been air defense missiles, 120 SM-2s, 80 SM-6s, and a combination of 20 SM-3 and enhanced Sea Sparrow missiles. Ships also fired around 160 rounds from their 5-inch main guns against slower targets, or those that were too close for missiles to engage, which highlights another issue that Operation Prosperity Guardian sailors have raised to the Navy's attention. What often happens when these really small drones get close enough to where the missile can't really engage in time, but the missile has a minimum range? The Houthi rebels have been hurling a lot of these things at Navy and commercial ships too. During one chaotic engagement early in the crisis, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer USS Kearney fought off cruise missiles and airborne drones for 9 hours straight, shooting down 19 separate targets in all. We had never done anything like this before. We had only trained to it. There was a lot of adrenaline going on. This was real world now. Yeah, again, just remembering how my days at sea felt, even in the combat theater of 2008, the most adrenaline I ever had going on was probably getting caught playing Xbox on watch or making sure I made it to the ice cream social before the mint chip ran out. So I can imagine how shook these guys were. I've mentioned mostly air defense missiles so far, but anti-surface missiles are also part of the shortage. Over the course of a 9-month deployment to the Red Sea, the ships of Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group fired 135 Tomahawk cruise missiles and 155 Standard missiles, which can also be fired in anti-surface mode. The aircraft from the USS Eisenhower herself fired 420 anti-surface weapons on top of 60 air-to-air missiles during the deployment, and those weapons also come out of the Navy's inventory. While the Navy has kept quiet about the exact number of weapons it has, Jim Fine over at the Heritage Foundation think tank crunched some numbers to estimate how much of a chunk the Eisenhower CSG's deployment has taken out of U.S. stocks. Open source estimates show the U.S. Navy has around 4,000 Tomahawk cruise missiles and up to 11,000 Standard missiles. So just this one deployment cost the Navy around 3% of its Tomahawks and 1 to 2% of the Standard missiles in inventory. And again, that's just the Eisenhower Strike Group firing at Houthi targets. That's an alarming rate of expenditure for a non-state actor using fairly unsophisticated weapons. Jim Fine also points out that current weapons production rates are too low to backfill these weapons, even if this were the Navy's only obligation. Using data from 2023, the US only produced 68 Tomahawks, 125 SM-6 missiles, and 619 Sidewinder air-to-air missiles. Other sources reinforce the pending crisis in weapons procurement. In war games run by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, simulating a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, the United States ran out of long-range missiles within a week of fighting. A week? That's it? A Ground News Vantage Plan trial membership is longer than that. A major factor in the weapons shortage is, ironically, how well-crafted US weapons are. Retired Commander Clark told Task and Purpose, "That's the problem. The weapons we've designed are too difficult to build for the industrial base because they're too sophisticated. They have too bespoke a supply chain, and they're manufactured by hand at low-rate productions. It costs about $4.3 million to build a single SM-6 missile. The heavier SM-3 missile costs even more, at between $12.5 to $28.7 million per missile. Even the cheaper SM-2 medium-range missile still costs over $2 million a unit, while the one-way attack drones the Navy is shooting at cost as little as $2,000. Just like the Navy, writing blank check after blank check while our enemies tape a stick of dynamite to a paper airplane and throw it at us. One of the more obvious solutions is to go low-tech. That's why US Navy destroyers and cruisers still have those big cannons on them after all. As much as you can call the radar-assisted auto-loading 127mm MK45 low-tech, it's a solution the crews in the Red Sea have already thought of, making use of the proximity-fused air-bursting shells and canister rounds that are already in service to shoot at drones, and some of the slower-moving missiles. The MK45 main gun can also be directed by the Mark 20 high-powered electro-optical sensor, allowing the crew to positively identify and engage targets visually when operating in the congested waters, like the Bab el-Mandeb Strait that links the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden. That's why the classic cannon is still such an asset to modern navies. You can't beat their versatility. With different ammunition types, radar or visual targeting, and a much lower cost per round, the MK45 can put a 5-inch high explosive round even on low-signature targets, like the latest breed of uncrewed service vessels. But it's still not a perfect solution. With a 13 nautical mile max range, the 5-inch gun has a much shorter range than even the lighter anti-air missiles. The RIM 162 enhanced Sea Sparrow missile, for example, can reach out to over 31 miles, and it's guided to boot. Against fast, maneuverable targets, the short-range and old-fashioned ballistic arc of the MK45 cannon doesn't offer a lot of protection, forcing crews to resort to the more expensive options. But the Navy just might have a trick up her sleeve to bridge the gap between missiles and the heavy artillery, and it looks like something right out of Mythbusters. Following the lessons from the Red Sea, the service has started testing hypervelocity projectiles. Originally designed for the Navy's railgun efforts, the HVP is a lightweight, guided, ultra-streamlined round that can fit into existing 127mm guns using a sabot casing. When fired, the projectile sheds the sabot and uses thin metal fins to guide the round on target. Out of the electromagnetic cannons, the HVP could reach speeds of over Mach 5. Adapted to a traditional gunpowder weapon like the MK45, the sleek subcaliber round still achieves a respectable Mach 3. The high speed and guidance fins adds a lot of range and accuracy to the 5-inch gun platform, allowing it to engage a wider range of missiles and fast-moving aerial targets. The Navy looked into adapting the HVP to the Mk-45 as far back as 2015, and even test-fired it during the RIMPAC exercise in 2018. But the program was put on ice in 2021. Now though, the Navy has brought the HVP back from the dead as part of the MADCAP initiative, which stands for Major Caliber Anti-Drone Air Program. MADCAP seeks to give Navy commanders more options to combat cruise missiles and the emerging drone threat that are more effective than traditional guns, yet much more cost-effective than missiles. That saves missile magazines for only the most high-priority threats, reducing the strain on missile supplies across the fleet. And to be honest, annihilating a quadcopter with a Mach 3 giant slug of a solid metal from miles away sounds pretty fun too. And don't think our submariners are going to let the surface fleet have all the fun. The wonderful world of torpedoes might get a similar treatment too. Currently, the US Navy's heavy torpedo is the fearsome Mark 48 ADCAP series of weapons. These are incredible torpedoes that were originally built to chase deep-diving and ultra-fast Soviet nuclear submarines like the Alpha class. The Alpha was a titanium-hulled, liquid metal-cooled beast that could dive down more than 1,100 feet and reach speeds of over 41 knots when submerged. That's enough to literally outrun some earlier Cold War torpedoes. And the US needed to build a weapon that could chase these flying fish down. But fast forward to 2025, and the Mk-48 is another expensive, highly sophisticated weapon that takes a lot of man-hours to build. Each Mk-48 Mod 7 torpedo costs $4.2 million, and production capacity is only around 10 a month. Yet not everything in the water is an Alpha class. Potential adversaries like China, North Korea, and Iran all operate slower and shallower diesel-electric subs, with a few nuclear boats in China's case. And surface warships are much easier targets for American subs to hunt, without many of the more advanced features of the Mk-48 torpedo. This is where the Raptor program comes in. The Rapid Acquisition Procurement Torpedo aims to provide American sub-captains with a second torpedo option for shooting at these easier targets, while keeping their Mk-48 ADCAPs in reserve for when the nuclear boats come out to play. Program manager Captain Chris Polk said the end product of the Raptor program should cost no more than $500,000, using short lead time components. In other words, no single part of the Raptor should take more than a year to produce. You think I'm crazy, but this can happen, especially when you're not making an ADCAP. This is a mission-specific, limited-capacity weapon, but it's still the same explosive yield. The US Navy is aggressively pursuing an unmanned combat fleet to supplement traditional warships, which puts even more strain on the torpedo supply chain. Captain Polk pointed out the Raptor could relieve some of that strain by outfitting unmanned platforms with a cheaper weapon that suits their less demanding mission set better than the expensive Mk-48. For now, Raptor remains just a concept, but we could start hearing about an actual prototype in the works sometime this year. And then, if you ask me, just a matter of time before we got ChatGPT issuing orders against DeepSeek Ernie bots until T-1000s are deploying through time, disrupting all kinds of nodes along the space-time continuum. But I obviously watch too many science fiction movies. Or do I? But there's one last dimension the Navy needs to address if it wants to head off the ammunition shortage before it starts. And it's an issue that's much more fundamental than just new weapon designs can tackle. In his article for the Heritage Foundation, Jim Fine points out that the Defense Department has a habit of only placing small, short-term orders for munitions. This disincentivizes ammunition companies and subcontractors from increasing their factory capacity, a trend we've also seen discussed when it comes to the 155mm artillery ammunition sent to the war in Ukraine. In short, Fine's point is that the Pentagon needs to sign bigger, longer-term contracts with ammunition suppliers to generate the continued demand they need to justify investing in the more industrial capacity. This is made more complicated when Congress doesn't pass a spending bill. For example, it can take over 2 years to produce a single long-range anti-ship missile, and military supply contracts should reflect that by anticipating future need earlier and funding procurement over multiple years. And of the 6 branches of the US military, the Navy might have a closer deadline than anyone to get ammunition stockpiles up to more appropriate near-peer conflict levels. The Chinese president has set a firm timetable for the PLA to be ready to invade Taiwan by 2027. While the Chinese military has challenges of its own, and that level of force readiness may or may not meet the 2027 schedule, it behooves the US Navy to prepare like it will, and that means adjustments to weapons procurement contracts need to start now. Solving an ammunition crisis of this scale will likely take a multi-pronged approach, and the Navy is pursuing other technologies and tactics that could further reduce the supply chain pressure. That brings us to what we've all been waiting for, or at least this Terminator Star Wars sci-fi fanboy, lasers. A prototype of the 60-plus kilowatt Helios laser just successfully hit a drone target during testing in 2024, and the Navy is testing even more sophisticated electronic warfare jammers that could prove effective against certain drone types. Directed energy weapons, like lasers or powerful jammers, don't use any ammunition, but they're very power hungry, so shipboard power plants and electrical systems need to be able to support future growth and demand as these weapons mature. But if the Navy can get the right mix of ship design, technological innovation, budgetary efficiency, and mobilizing American industry within the next few years, sailors and airmen might never have to fear running out of ammo when they need it the most. But if you told me back in 2008 that we'd be fast-tracking laser cannons and photon torpedo electronic jammers due to the Navy literally running out of conventional missiles, I would have thought you were talking about the latest drop of Call of Duty. But in the very real world of today's naval warfare, one thing remains true. To maintain the edge on our adversaries, the U.S. will need to adapt quickly and appropriately to prevent a potential World War III. And you never know, maybe even a Cyberdyne Skynet invasion. But I digress. As always, thanks for watching. I'm former Navy nuke and sci-fi fanboy Augie Donnell, signing off.